What's up, guys? I hope you guys are all having a fantastic week, and I hope most of you are doing something with Sync 60. We just started that this last Monday, and the deadline is quickly approaching. You need to join us in Sync Academy by this Monday if you want to win this bad boy, this massive S61 complete control keyboard right here. So you can obviously follow along with us just by being on YouTube, following along and completing your own Sync 60 challenge. But within Sync Academy, we have our progress chart and we have our community, our mini course basically within Sync Academy, our Sync 60 course, where you basically can interact with other members, post your tracks for feedback, and most importantly, log in and fill out your progress chart, and then each week mark yes on your weekly goals. That's how we're going to create a community-wide accountability system here. So we set our individual Sync 60 goals, but then as a community, we can all basically log in, myself, you guys, everybody in Sync Academy. We can see who's logging in and marking yes on those columns. So I hope that gives you guys a little bit of an encouragement and maybe even a little bit of a negative consequence that you want to avoid, to make sure that you do log in and participate to get yourself to whatever your goal is for the end of the 60 days. So again, I'll have a link below if you guys want to join us in Sync Academy, and the deadline is coming up very, very quickly, within a day or two. So make sure you guys do join us if you want to be eligible to win that keyboard. So with that out of the way, I have brought Trevor and Mike with me again, like we did last week. And this week, I want to talk to them, and I'll share with them my story as well. But we want to talk about our history as far as getting into the sync licensing business, and what was it that brought us into this interesting, very niche side of the entertainment industry, and basically what was going on in our lives before we discovered it. What is our story of discovering it? How did we figure out that this is something that we could do? And then what made it a decision for us to actually devote our lives to it? Because it's kind of a crazy choice, actually, to go headfirst into this industry, because it's certainly not easy to succeed. It's certainly not something that just comes overnight. It's a long-term commitment, but it was certainly worth it, I know, for myself and for them as well. So we want to really just give you guys a little bit more of a backstory. Now, I know I've had a couple of videos I've put out there telling you guys about my story getting into sync licensing, but I'll probably talk a little bit more in depth of what happened with me, and maybe try to share some new details that I haven't shared at all, actually, on my channel or in my podcast. But I want to let them start, because I'm really curious, actually. I know a little bit about their histories, but I really want to get into some of the details for why Trevor and Mike got into this business. So, Trevor, we were just talking about your story and how you got into it. Why don't you go ahead and start us from the beginning? First of all, how old were you? I know you were fairly young, just like I was. We were about the same age when we first got started in this, about like 10, 12 years ago. So where were you in your life, in your career, and how did you get into this crazy industry?
Well, the technical reason of why I got in this industry is because I had a stepfather who was also in it, and I kind of learned the industry that way. But the urge came from somewhere else. The urge to come into the industry came from this thing that I discovered, years before I even came into the industry. So when I was growing up, I listened to just a lot of general music, right? A lot of just pop music, hip hop, all this stuff, right? On school bus ride home, all that kind of stuff. And at some point, I think I know the point. I was thinking about it. I think I know the moment where I realized that I liked TV music more than anything. And it was when I watched the movie Saw. Because at the end of the movie Saw, I'm not going to spoil the story or anything, but there's this reveal moment, right? There's this big reveal of what happened, kind of the twist and turns all kind of get revealed. And it starts off with this little piece of music that's just kind of like, dun, 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 dun. And then they keep adding to it. It gets more intense, more stacks start happening as you're watching. And I didn't realize while I was watching the film that this was happening. I was watching what was going on in the video. And this piece of music was just making me feel an emotion, making me revealing, making me, it was amplifying what I was watching. And when it was all done, I remember having that melody and stuff stuck in my head and being what just happened to me? Why, how did I, the storyline was cool and all, but this piece of music really amplified everything that I was feeling and watching and everything. And so that I realized that at that moment, I started looking into more score type stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I realized not even just that, but back then Apple was doing those commercials where the background was a color and then it was just a silhouette of a person. And those were really good marketing, because the music and the visuals and the music were living together in a way that created emotion, where I was just I need to buy this thing, right? This iPod. And actually, this wasn't even iPhones at the time. It was just an iPod. And And I was realizing that and being like, man, it would be so cool to make music or be a part of music that like affected somebody in the way that I was being affected by. Not, because a lot of people have like emotional, like, oh, I went through a breakup and that's my emotional connection. But this was more just kind of like, whoever made this music made me feel a way, like involuntarily almost. And so that was kind of the birth of like me being like, well, I want to make music that does that. And then as I got a little bit older, like I said, I have a stepfather who was in the music, the TV and film world. And I was like, well, I'm going to go that direction because that's where it all happens. Like you can kind of do it in the record world. And I tried with, going to artists and stuff like that, but I just didn't, it wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for, attaching music with emotion. And so getting into TV and film, that, going in that route really fulfilled that for me, made me like be able to make music where I was like, man, I can tell that this music is made to express this emotion. And if I were to just watch this scene and play my music to it, I either am succeeding at making them feel that emotion or I'm not. And if I'm not, then it's a failure and I need to retry and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the origin story of how my interest in this industry like came about, is just reacting to like the extreme. Another cool example like later in life was there's this movie called Smokin' Aces that I don't know, it wasn't that popular. It had Ryan Reynolds in it, and at the end of the movie it was the same thing, right? There's this like big reveal of the like plot, and this piece of music, I remember just sitting there in the theater like man, that was so cool, that resolution piece of music that just made me feel everything that this hour and a half movie was trying to get me to feel. And so that's kind of what got me into it, and how I kind of apply that thought process in all of my TV and film music now.
And then how old were you when you first jumped into this industry? I know you were even younger than I was. I was around 23 or so. So how old were you when you first even discovered the business and decided you wanted to start doing this a little more seriously?
So my first piece of music that was in a library, I think I was 17. It was like an EDM dance club type thing or whatever. Just kind of ended up getting into something or getting into a library like at some point. That was when I started, but I wasn't good enough as musically to be able to do what I wanted to do as far as like the emotion stuff, like doing cool string stuff and builds and transitions. I was just learning how to do like cool dance tracks, like and four on the floor type stuff, which I can program, and I don't need a lot of music capability to do. So I was I was doing music and albums similar to that at first around. That was still, I think, in high school, like right at the end of high school. So 17, I think, was when my first like thing was.
Yeah, that's a very young start actually to this whole thing. So I think you actually got in well before I did. So because I think we're a couple of years apart. So yeah, many years actually after you did. I even discovered that this is something that you could do. So interesting, man. Really cool. Mike, why don't you let us know about your story and where you were before you learned about this and what made you jump in?
Yeah. First off, I want to preface this with I think you guys should probably sit down, grab a drink or grab a cup of coffee or something like this, because this is going to be a real long story. I actually started I started in this business over 20 years ago. But I'll tell you guys how basically like what got me into it. And it was like basically when I was a kid, I always wanted to do music for picture. I always wanted to compose and score. So one of the first films I think that like kind of caught my attention, their score really caught my attention, was Conan the Barbarian. And it was like I was a little kid and just those epic drums and big brass just got to me. And then after that, I discovered Blade Runner, and that was like the weirdest, like most different thing I've ever heard in my life. And it was so cool. Like I loved all the synths and stuff. And then after that was Terminator. And yeah, so, those three scores are like, holy shit, like that's what I want to do. I want to make, and it was never about like, being an orchestral composer or anything like that too. I just loved the sounds and I loved all of that. So I was like, that's, and I loved the way that, it just brought just so much action to the picture. So that was like my influences. My first actual gig as a composer came when I was 14 I'm about to date myself too. So it was like the early to mid 90s. I want to say fuck, do I not know my own age? Shit. Like 94-ish, I think, where I got hired to score a video game, like a shareware video game out in Pittsburgh, where I was growing up. And it was kind of a fluke thing because I was just looking for designers and programmers to like kind of do this, like sort of back then there was this whole scene called like the demo scene, where it's basically these like animated music videos and stuff like that, and presentations that people did, mostly happened in Europe. So I was looking for a team to put together to do one of those with me doing the music. Turns out I bumped into a game developer who was doing this pretty cool like Marble Madness style shareware game. They needed music. I was so excited. I was like 14 years old. I was like, yeah, let me do it. You know, it's like all I had was like a PC. I was using mod trackers at the time, so that's all I needed to do was you just needed a PC, and you know, it got me into sampling and everything like that. So I went nuts. I wrote like something stupid like 45 tracks before I even had a contract. You know, so I was like super excited. It was really cool. The game went out. It actually shipped, which, you know, is kind of a miracle. That led to another job with them, which was kind of like this grammar class sort of educational software that they were doing. And again, it was me scoring to little animations that they had of storybook. And that was totally different. That was the first time I've ever, you know, had the challenge of looking at a piece of picture and writing a style of music that I didn't, you know, really do. You know, I had to do a lot of like medieval sounding stuff, like weird time signatures, classical music and stuff like that. And, you know, of course, for the Marble Madness thing, I was doing everything from hip hop to like, you know, techno, like to unlimited techno, like back then, you know, that kind of stuff. So from that, as I was formulating what I was actually going to do for college and all that kind of stuff, that's when I really thought about like, okay, I want to go this route. I want to make music for picture. How do I do this? So at that time, there really wasn't a sync licensing industry. There wasn't really, you know, a music library community. You know, so a lot of music that was being licensed was coming from major labels or, you know, stuff like that. So I didn't really know that was a route that you could take. All I knew was just, you know, being a composer, being a film composer, eventually being a games composer. If games, I was like, oh yeah, if games ever took off like in the mainstream, which I hope so, but who knows? Like, and then look at us now. So, you know, that's what I wanted to do. I moved to New York for college. Got into basically studying music technology at NYU, trying to learn about all this kind of stuff. From there, basically, it was just a studio rat anywhere where I could go. One of the studios was where I became friends with some of the people there was they were a commercial music house. And they were telling me like, oh, okay, well, if you want to get into scoring for film, you kind of have to go through TV. Like at that time, I guess that was a progression. So I was like, okay, cool. So how do I get into TV? And they're like, well, you can do commercials. So I was looking at how they did it. And, you know, at this time, they were like doing Intel commercials. They were, you know, those, if you guys remember those Intel commercials with like the Blue Man Group and stuff like that back in like the early 2000s. They were doing,
yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, those are really cool. So I got to sit in on those sessions. I was sitting in on sessions with the composers, you know, obviously like doing stupid stuff too, like getting coffee and whatever. But so I got to see that whole world. And then they kind of threw me a bone once and just like, hey, we got this pitch going. You know, it's like, you know, 10 o'clock at night. They're like, yeah, we got this pitch at 8 o'clock in the morning. Everyone left, you know, you want to work on it? Go ahead. You know, so I was like, yeah, you know, spent the whole night, worked on a little demo for them. You know, of course it didn't win, but like I just had so much fun doing it, you know, so that even more solidified that I wanted to get in this business. So at the same time, I was also producing and releasing drum and bass records with a drum and bass collective called Mathematics. We were based out of Brooklyn and we were like touring Europe and stuff like that. So I had that kind of going on as a career. And at that same time too, it was kind of interesting because the world of like sync music and stuff like that started to become, there was like the infancy of it, right? So that was like around the time that, was it Nokia licensed that Daft Punk tune, you know? And that was like the first time ever that like, you know, especially like at that time, Daft Punk was underground, like an underground artist was like, oh shit, doing commercials. Then Moby's whole entire album got licensed to ad campaigns.
I remember that.
So that was a big deal at that time. And, especially as an underground electronic musician, it looked at that as like, holy shit, that's a way to make money, right? So, and just because of that wave, there was another company that started up in New York that was a music house. And they had this cool idea of putting together a roster of underground producers and artists to be their composer roster for commercials and stuff like that and show themes and stuff. So got onto that. They signed my group and we just started making music. And one of the first jobs was this collaborative job that we did that was the theme for, and actually the entire show package for the very, very first video game award show on Spike TV. It's friggin' incredible. We were doing all like the bumpers and then all the promos, like for like the Funk Flex, after party like promos and stuff like that. We did all of those. Got us to do like hip hop, funk remixes, like drum and bass remixes of hip hop and rock and stuff like that. That turned into like a huge rebranding sort of job with Comedy Central, where I got to do a lot of those like Comedy Central logo bumpers and stuff like that. Which is funny, Trevor. You mentioned that iPod commercial with like the silhouettes and stuff. So yeah. I actually did. Comedy Central did a spoof of that, basically where they had like the silhouette of a dude like kind of dancing around, same exact thing as the iPod commercial, and then his head explodes into a Comedy Central logo. So I actually did that. I don't know if you guys remember that.
That's funny. I feel like I think I do remember that. Or something similar, like spoofed at the time. Yeah, that might have been it. That's funny.
So yeah, I did that. And again, just furthering this whole notion of like, okay, this is super cool. Especially at that time, the money was good, especially for like custom jobs and stuff like that. And then really what, I guess around 2005, 2006, I think that's when that company got approached by MTV and Viacom to be like, hey, can you give us a bunch of tracks for, Road Rules, like Real World, that kind of stuff, right? And so that was my first sort of foray into actual sync licensing, so I gave a ton of tracks for that. I thought it was super cool to like, it was one thing to just see your stuff on TV in a commercial, but then like to see it in a show that like, oh shit, like a lot of people are watching this too. This is like really cool. So I was like, oh, I want to do this. And so I started studying how that worked, what licensing was, what publishing was, and that whole game. And it was kind of good that I looked into all that because a few years later, the market crashed. We had the big recession of 2008, coinciding with the writer's strike here in LA, in Hollywood. So at that time, I think, the whole writer's strike and sync licensing kind of go hand in hand because at that time, that's when reality TV became mainstream, just became huge, blew up. So, reality TV is like, they just start churning out episodes that need tons and tons and tons and tons of music. So I think that was when I witnessed like sort of the birth of our modern, like sort of sync licensing industry. And I said this before, I didn't actually take it seriously at the time, because like at that time I was just like, I was making a lot of money, like doing, commercials and custom composition stuff. And I thought that would never end. Of course it did, like budgets got slashed and everything like that. But at the same time, like on the library side, I always thought that, I always looked at that as being like, okay, well, this is like the throwaway bin, right? So the stuff that didn't get taken that didn't win, I would throw it into a library, Well, music started getting better and better and better. And then like some of the houses I was working with as a composer, in like, from 2010 to like 2015, started shifting their model over to licensing libraries, first, and then custom composition. So that's how I got into that. And yeah, basically leading to now to where, I'm still composing custom jobs, but like it's definitely a mix of that plus composing for, licensing libraries, like library albums, stuff like that, along with also obviously running my own company. So.
Awesome, man. Man, you guys are both beating me at 14 and 17. You guys were kids when you got into this thing, so I felt like an old man at 23 getting in here. So that's awesome, man. You obviously have a very extensive history there, in and out of a bunch of different segments of this industry. So that's really cool. And now obviously you guys are both library owners and composers. So that's why I love having you guys on this, because you guys get to give us, all these different perspectives that are really useful and really valuable, which is really interesting. For myself, I want to ask you guys this too. Kind of going even a little deeper into what is it about music that made you want to pursue a career in music in one way or another. I really want to find out if you guys maybe have an early memory of something that just like, yeah, I want to do music. What was that? I can tell you guys, if anybody hasn't, I don't know if I've shared this, but when I was, I think in fourth or fifth grade, ABC had a multi-series Beatles documentary that they started airing, and it was like 9 parts. They would show 1 hour every week or something like that. I recently watched it again. I can't remember. If you guys know what it is, let me know. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a really interesting documentary where basically they had behind the scenes stuff of what was happening in their careers. They would obviously interview them, the ones that were obviously still alive, asking them about, reflecting on that time and stuff. And it was just I had never really heard of the Beatles up until that point. I had heard some of their tracks, but didn't know anything about them. And I remember they sold the CDs along with the documentary, so you could order it was like a double discs kind of a thing. There were lots of, all their basically number one hits on it. So I just completely got consumed by the Beatles, at that young age, and just seeing the impact they had on the world, the fact that people were losing their minds when they were just, touring and coming to the US and just all this stuff. And I was like, I want to do that. I just love the excitement and the power and the music. I mean, the music just was so infectious. It was so, I don't know, it just took a hold of me very, very quickly. And so that point on, I started thinking, what instrument do I want to play? And luckily, I'm very fortunate. My parents are both musical, and they are very encouraging to myself and my other brothers. They wanted us to be involved in music in some form, pick up an instrument, take lessons. They paid for lessons even. We were very fortunate that they could do that. And even when we were growing up, we lived kind of out in the sticks in the middle of the countryside. And we had this, it was a former chicken coop that they had actually turned into kind of like it actually had walls and a door, but they used to actually have chickens in it. And it turned into sort of, we called it the back house. And it was just where we would put our drums and our guitars. And we'd have our buddies over, and we would just start jamming, and we would play all of our really terrible music when we were in like 7th and 8th grade. And I just remember a lot of fond memories, even jamming with my brothers. And then we would have our friends over. We put together our own little, we had one festival called the Hay Days, where we literally, our friend was their parents were farmers. So we put a whole stack of hay bales, created a stage out of one layer of hay, put a big plyboard on top of it, and that was our stage. So we had all of our friends and family come out. So we had our own little mini Woodstock thing happening in our backyards, basically. So just a lot of cool creative stuff that we were doing when we were kids, and it all stemmed from that Beatles thing. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tour, wanted to be in a band, I wanted to play music for the world. Now, as the years went on, got into many bands, tried so many different ways to try to get my music out there, create income, tour, that kind of thing. And as that process went on, one thing I started to realize about myself is that I liked playing, and I'm a drummer, if you guys don't know. I am a drummer, and I love playing live, but there is a lot of hard work and hustle that goes on between the times that you're having that fun for about 45 minutes on stage. That's the fun part. But up until that 45 minutes, it's lugging your drums, especially in LA, and I was in LA for many years, getting your drums from your apartment downstairs. Sometimes there's no stairs, so we had to go down the stairs with every single piece of my drum set, squashing it, basically just cramming it into my tiny little car, lugging it all the way to the rehearsal spot. This isn't even a show we're doing, we're just doing a rehearsal, paying $30 for the rehearsal spot, or sometimes $50, putting it all back, putting it in my car, lugging it back to my apartment, and doing that like 2 or 3 times a week for rehearsals. At some point, and also with the gigs that we were playing, if you guys don't know, in LA, it's pay to play. Usually you have to pay as the band to even play on a lot of these stages. There were just all this just garbage and BS that I was really not excited and not happy about. Just to get to that like 30 or 15 or 45 minutes of fun on stage with my band. And so what I started getting into was producing, because I love the art. I've always loved, just since those early days of getting in love with the Beatles, I love the art of songwriting, of creating songs, of creating, chord progressions, melodies, lyrics, that kind of thing. I've just always loved that, and I've dabbled in it most of my life, actually. And as I, got into LA and got a little tiny MacBook computer, got a copy of Logic, I think it was 7 or 8 or whatever it was back then. I started just producing and playing around with things, and I just remember feeling that that excitement that I got on stage for that 45 minutes. I was getting that on a daily basis from my home, from my computer. That same that adrenaline rush, right? Giving yourself goosebumps, feeling like you're Superman. I was getting that without having to lug my drums down the stairs into my car into the rehearsal space and paying $50 and without paying for these gigs and dealing with all the nonsense of promoters and all that crap. So I was getting sort of the joy juice, the endorphin rush, the dopamine hit. I was getting all of that without all the BS and garbage. So I was starting to get primed. This was probably, I guess, in my early 20s, 20, 21, 22. Starting to think what, maybe the live gigging, the band thing, even though that was still for sure my number one thing, I want to be the next Beatles, right? That's what I wanted to do. There was now this new form of creating music that was much more enjoyable, and I started spending more and more time doing because I just loved it. But I would obviously use it sometimes to write music for the band, and it would kind of feed into the thing that I was doing. So it actually wasn't until the band that I had when I was 23 or so in LA, and I've told this story many times. We were like a hip hop rock project. We got signed to Tyrese Gibson, the R&B singer and actor. And this was when he was in Transformers. So Transformers was just coming out. We thought, this guy's going to the moon. He's going to be the next Will Smith. He's going to be, a household name. And this guy just signed us. And so, of course, I'm 23 thinking that's it. We're on our way to becoming the next Beatles. So a lot of moving parts with that whole story, but it didn't work out. We didn't get a deal. We didn't get on to the next level to start touring in a major way. We did local tours, California tours, that kind of thing, but we didn't go national or international. But during that process, and maybe we've never even talked about this, Trevor, but it was during that process with that band that we actually got introduced to Trevor's stepdad. And he was a library owner that had tons and tons of placements. He had all this credibility. And we as a band were introduced to him through a mutual contact. And the idea was, hey, well, there's multiple ways to get your music out there. Maybe start thinking about this. That was the first time. So I was 23, I think. Never had heard about this side of the business at all. Keep in mind, I went to college for 4 years and got a major in recording arts and a minor in music business. So 4 years of college, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars I spent on that. This was never even mentioned in a conversation in passing, never read about it. No professor ever talked about it. And none of my, colleagues or fellow students even knew about it. So it was like, what? How did I go through my entire college in the last 4 years in LA and all this stuff? And I never once even heard that this is an option for me. I had heard of film composing, but again, I always thought well, you got to be, Steven Spielberg's nephew, basically. You got to be connected with somebody big to even get a shot at doing that. So we get exposed to this side of the business where it's like, no, you can just literally just go talk to a music library owner. You can email them. You can talk to them. We were fortunate enough to be personally introduced and we met them in person. But it's just as easy these days to just email somebody directly and ask them, hey, this is the music that I make. I see this is what you guys are doing. Can I help you out? Can I give you some music? It's literally that simple. You don't have to be connected or have some sort of an in with somebody to do it. It's absolutely possible. So just being exposed to that side of the business, we as a band decided maybe not, because we had other plans. We thought we were going to the major label route and we wanted to do other things with our music. But myself, I was like, I'm really enjoying making music. I love producing and songwriting and creating stuff. And I've been doing it now for a few years. Maybe this could be a way for me to get that sort of dopamine hit, that love juice that I'm getting from over here, and now supply it to a different side of the business and give it a shot, because who knows, maybe the band won't work out for the rest of my life. And I turned out to be right on that, unfortunately. But that's how every band is. Every band breaks up at some point. Most of them. They always come back though, right? And now the reunion tours are big now. All the bands that broke up, they're coming back to cash in a little bit before it's all over. So, but so I decided just personally, I wanted to go in the route of just being home, not having to lug my drums anywhere, just enjoying producing music and getting better and better at it. So that was my sort of forte into what was going to allow me to do music full time. And that's really what it was all about. I mean, whether it was going to be touring and being in a band and that kind of thing, or, doing TV film licensing, with either one of them, there was still going to be ability for me to get my creative out there, my creative juices. I can get something out there. I can actually be doing something creative and musical, because I felt like that's really just where I belong. That's where most of my talent, I feel like it's just, I've focused most of my life. It's not that I was born with the talent. I just spent most of my teenage years doing music. And so that's just what I live and breathe. So I felt like, what else do I want to do with my time? This is what I love doing anyways. So to me, it was like kind of like a path of, all right, whatever one I can use to get to that point, I will take. And so as the years went on, I have one foot in the licensing world, not taking, just like Mike, not taking it super seriously, but starting to put music out there, not great music, but at least putting something out there. And then constantly pushing with the band, trying to get out there, trying to get deals. Also just trying to hang out with other popular artists at studio sessions, hoping they'll bring me on as a producer, as a songwriter. So I have kind of my foot in both camps as the years went on. And of course, you guys know that it was the licensing one where I was like, hey, I just got a contract. I just got a check, just got a placement, just got a royalty, got another contract, got another check, got another placement, got another royalty. And this one just started to fizzle away. There just wasn't any sort of forward momentum happening on this side of my career. So obviously, as the years went on, you kind of start to weigh where you want to go and put more of your effort. So I probably didn't get really serious about it for 3 or 4 years into my career. That's when I started to branch out and partner with a couple of different libraries and expand my network a bit more and finally create a website for myself. I mean, for the first 4 years, I think I had no website. I had no way to really present myself professionally. So I just wasn't seeing it as my career. I was like, side income, kind of a side hustle. So that's really my forte into going to this. And of course, by 3 or 4 years, the artist, band, touring, that kind of thing had really just died out completely. And I had just doubled down on this side of it. So I want to actually now ask you guys, going before sync licensing, maybe down into your, when you were 10, 11, 12, whatever, what's one of your earliest memories, or, what's your story for why music was going to be something that you felt like you wanted to dedicate a big chunk of your life or all of your life? Trevor, why don't you start?
I think for me, growing up, I didn't have anything to obsess over. I spent a lot of time on school buses. I lived kind of far from school, and home life wasn't really like interesting. I didn't have a lot going on. So I really kind of just disappeared into my like CD player and then later MP3 player, And since I had nothing to tinker with, I wasn't like into a lot of I was into basketball, so I spent a good amount of time doing that. But I also was like listening to music while I was playing basketball. And I started to just like aggressively listen to where I would, whatever the music was, whether it was like a new Britney Spears song or, a new trailer thing or whatever it was, and I was sitting on this bus or in a car or whatever, I was just listening to it over and over again. What does this sound? How did that happen? Just kind of dissecting everything and really getting obsessed with everything that has to do with like what is hitting my ear holes right now. And that obsession, I think, led me to being like, that's what we do, right? Our hobbies today are our careers tomorrow. And there are a lot of like, and I've noticed this for a few people, like I've known people who were in a career for one thing and then their hobby was like golf, and then their career switched to like something to do with golf. And then while they're golfing, like they just keep bouncing from their career. Anyway, so that was kind of my growing up my hobby was just like dissecting music and like trying. And then eventually when computers started becoming more than just like organ trail machines.
Great game.
Yeah, dude. I spent a lot of time with that. Giving everybody goofy names and stuff. Anyway, So once they became a little more than organ trail machines, they it allowed me to participate without having to be in a studio, because like all these albums that I was like enjoying, it was like this, they were in these giant rooms with all these big computers. It was $500,000 to try and like, even just to try to mess with all this stuff, right? These expensive keyboards and all that stuff. Well, that started to change, which allowed me to just not just mentally tinker anymore. I physically could. I could, get some software, maybe one keyboard that was a little bit cheaper now, and then really goof around. And, once that started happening, I think that's kind of what got me into it, is I got to apply the like years of just kind of like mentally dissecting music and feeling kind of like that was my hobby and my obsession. And so then I got to actually like go on the out, like I was ingesting it all so much, but now I got to like outgest it. I don't know whatever the word, whatever the out word.
That works. We'll let that pass.
Outgest. All right. Is it Trevor trademark there? And so hashtag outgest. So I got to do that, like outwardly express or whatever that. And then that became my obsession. It was not just consuming it and dissecting it, but also then trying to recreate it. And that, like to kind of come full circle with my original story, that And then the emotion part that really hit me when I was just consuming music in a more visual way with visuals and media and stuff. Once those two things like bled together, that's kind of what led me to being like, well, that, and then my relationship, with my stepfather and the TV and film world being like, well, I'm going to go that direction. Cause I started not wanting to go in that direction. I was like, I don't know. I was trying to work with indie artists and I'm going to produce the next, Eminem album or whatever. And, but then I started going towards the TV and film stuff because I started to realize that relationship between all my music sounded emotional. I was making really dramatic music. I was making stuff that I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape my like tinkering, make cool sounds, emotions blend together to make music. And so once I finally gave into it and I was like, okay, I clearly am trying to create an emotion and then make it sound cool with all these new modern sounds. And then that's what I've now created. Once I realized that that's my thing, TV and film just made sense. And that's when it just kind of snowballed. Right. And I was like, okay, I get this, right? I understand it, which is why I still do it now. I think, even though I don't really make music anymore because my hobby was learning about entrepreneurship and business. And now I do that more than I do my other thing, which was music. Right. So I don't really do music much, but I still have that understanding, right? I still I'll listen to a track and I still can dissect it like crazy. I can still feel whatever the emotion is, which allows me to then, whenever, I was just talking to Jesse about this example of a brief will come in and it'll just be like, hey, we need something like this. And they'll give a YouTube link. Now, that doesn't mean that there's this bullet point of they need something that has, guitar, drums, 120 BPM, like that. Those things are important, but they're not the core of it. And the core of it is all the things that I kind of grew up figuring out, which was sonics and emotion, right? And so many people get stuck on one of those two things and then they can't put two together. And so it's hard to fulfill that need musically if you're not putting those two things together. So I think that my upbringing of those two, that symbiotic relationship, allowed me to kind of do well in this industry because I can see what the emotion and sonics of a piece of music is. And then if we need to recreate it, whether it's from a brief or just a random piece of music or whatever, we do. And then do it well, right? Because there's so many people, it's like, well, my track has the same types of instruments, same tempo, same whatever. Why didn't they say yes to it? And usually it's because it's not inflicting that emotion that the original track is inflicting. And you haven't figured out how to do that, whether it's the melody or the progression or the build or whatever. Something in there is you're not hitting that emotion part. And that, I think, is where, because I learned, I've tinkered and figured all that stuff out growing up, is why I can see that and then, relay that to a team of producers or whatever, or whoever I'm working with, and make it happen in that way. So.
And I want to make a point on that, and that is the whole point of Sync Academy, guys. You can learn how to produce music from anywhere. There's plenty of free tutorials. There's plenty of places you guys can go to learn how to use the technical side of a Logic Pro or an Ableton. But if it's about creating a memorable piece of music, an emotional piece of music, a piece of music that dynamically keeps you engaged, doesn't get too loopy, not too repetitive, and hits a specific emotional point or a tone or a vibe or whatever you want to call it, a mood, that's what we do. That's why Trevor and Mike and myself are here in Sync Academy, is because we're providing all these resources for you guys, so that if that doesn't come naturally to you, that's not something that you just intuitively get. It's some people are a little bit more prone to it than others. You don't have to be born with that skill. You can acquire that skill. That's not something that you have to well, I just don't get it, I guess it won't work for me. You got to work at it. You got to practice it, but you can absolutely do that. And the second point is exactly what Trevor said, that we have our plugins and palettes series with Sync Academy. That's where all three of us are basically opening up our DAWs, showing you guys exactly what plugins, what sounds we use. I've gotten a few, even in the syndicate, when people have posted tracks for me to review, and they'll say something like, well, I use the exact drums that Jesse uses, so they should be good. And I listen to it, and I'm like, doesn't work, right? Because maybe the velocities are all exactly the same, and you created a 4-bar loop and copied and pasted that 4-bar loop, and there's no different drum loops, there's no different velocities or hits, or maybe little ghost notes on the snare. So there's no groove to what you're doing. I don't want to dance to it. I'm just kind of I'm robotically getting bored with it because it's just the same thing over and over again. Yes, you're using the same plugins, the same sounds, maybe the same mixing. By the way, we're getting some mixing and mastering plugins and palettes stuff coming soon too. But this is the kind of thing where it's not just about the technical. Yes, I have a horn track and a drum track and guitars. Therefore, I have hit your brief robotically. Here you go. I hope that obviously you're not going to be able to succeed if you just go at the bare minimum of technical specifications. Like that's certainly step one, making sure you're in the right genre, in the right style, I guess. But man, the emotion is exactly what Trevor said. It's really just all about that emotion, and it's binary. People are going to click play on your track, and it's either going to make them feel what they need to feel, or it won't. And sometimes even having the most polished sound isn't always the one that wins if that polished sound doesn't make you feel something, right? If it feels very generic, kind of, again, not much of a human feel to it, not much of a human groove to it. It just feels very extremely quantized or very robotic. I remember an old friend of mine spent, I don't know, probably $50, maybe to $100,000 worth on plugins, outboard gear, and he just had to have everything. If there was something new, he bought it, and he was fortunate enough to have the income to be able to just buy anything. But his music was so boring, it was so robotic. He would play me stuff all the time, and I would be kind of nice about it, but it's like, your drums are just very, very, very stiff, no feel to it. He was trying to do hip-hop music, and if you guys have tried, I'm not a great hip-hop producer, but if you guys have even delved into hip-hop at all, it's all about that swag. It's all about that feel. It's got to have a little bit of swing to it. It's got to feel a little bit behind the beat. There's so many things you got to do with that. And if you have the right microphone, you have the right plugins, you have the right MIDI keyboard, you have all the right stuff, but your music just feels dead. It just feels like literally a robot created it. You're not doing it right. So it's not so much about the equipment. It's not so much about the plugins, but it's how you use what you currently have. So I just wanted to really emphasize that point. It's very, very important. Mike, why don't you tell us about your story, just getting into music generally? Like, what was it that attracted you to music in the first place?
Yeah. Before I get into that, I kind of want to add on to, the last comments that you guys had about the emotion and stuff like that. Coming from advertising, I think another important thing to think about, especially in advertising, is understanding the brand that you're working with. So again, you can get these briefs telling you about like whatever the emotion is and get these references and stuff like that. But sometimes, you really have to know the brand of the client, because sometimes, you may and really be able to decipher, well, what is it that they really mean by this reference? Sometimes they'll pull out a reference and say like, oh yeah, they'll give you a link to like a Billie Eilish tune, but if you dig deeper, you'll understand like, oh, they really only put that link in because that's all they know of what is modern, and really, if you really dig into what their brand is, that, well, if you do a Billie Eilish tune, it's not, and even if you put a Billie Eilish tune to their stuff, it's just not really going to fit. And of course, like, nothing is ever 100%. So it's a lot of trial and error too. It's a lot of like back and forth communication, trying to figure out like, well, are you guys trying to change your brand? Are you guys, or is it just a little modification? What's happening, right? So, and sometimes jobs can take longer because of that back and forth and experimentation. But yeah, I think really understanding, not only hitting the emotion of like whatever, especially that's really crucial, especially when you're talking about what do you call it? Like background music for scenes, themes, stuff like that. In advertising, a lot of that does happen. You hit the emotion, but on top of that, this added layer of also hitting the brand. So, for instance, with and that even goes for trailers too. Like Marvel movies. That's a brand. So that has, even though it delves into so many different genres of music in their trailers, there's a certain sound style, like the way it's produced, the way it's presented, that has to fit that. That's different from, Netflix, Netflix originals, stuff like that. So, but yeah, just wanted to kind of add that in.
Great
point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
But I want to find out also what your history with music as well. What got you into all this?
Yeah. As far as my history goes, so the first thing I can actually remember, just basically about sound, that really stuck with me is, I don't know, I must have been like maybe 4 or 5. And my dad, my dad was a doctor, and, he just give me like whatever regular checkups or whatever, just, and I think at one time he's like, you have a really good ear. And I didn't exactly know what that meant, at that time, but it was something that stuck with me. So as like time went on or whatever, I started just naturally noticing sounds around me, paying attention to music, paying attention to other things. When I started taking piano lessons, that was something like I realized, so I was kind of, I was good at playing piano, but I was bad at the lessons because I would never read the music. My teacher would catch me a couple of times because what I would do is I would listen to the recording and then like play it, and then she would catch me because I would never turn the page. So, and of course I'm playing other notes because whatever the recording was, so so that's how I cheated. But yeah, that also furthered this whole thing. That's like I loved what I heard, and I love emulating things that I heard. So another thing that furthered that, I talked about the score for Conan the Barbarian. One of the first things I did when I really learned how to play piano was I just started trying to emulate the drums, those big taiko drums from Conan the Barbarian on piano. So like as low as the notes that I could hit, like as hard as I could hit them, trying to just whatever I could do, muffle the piano, do whatever, try to get them to sound like that drum, because that's all I had. Fast forward a few years, probably when I was about 10 or 11 or something like that, I got into a rudimentary version of sampling, which basically is taking my mom's two-set cassette deck and, just making tape loops. Out of it. So I think I eventually wore out all the tape heads on her deck. Of course she got mad and everything like that. But hey, I made all these and the point was, so yeah, I was about 10. So like I was in fourth grade, and the point was I was trying to make these instrumentals for friends of mine at school to rap over. So like, I was trying to start like a rap group, and I was just like, and people would ask me, and it's like, oh, do you rap? I was like, no, I don't care about that. I don't want to rap. Like, I'll do the beats, So that was always where my mindset was. And then that led to a couple of years after that, like my next door neighbor was in college for audio engineering, and he let me go over there like all the time, just like kind of check out the gear and stuff. And I remember he sold me my first sampler, which was an old Ensoniq Mirage, really shitty sounding 8-bit sampler. Fucking loved it. I had no idea how to use it, but like I had, he gave me like one like floppy disk of like vinyl, like hip hop drum sounds and stuff that I loaded in. I just loved how crunchy it was and everything. So, and that really just set me started. And from that point on, I was just like, yes, this is what I want to do. And it was always a struggle between like, well, I don't have a studio. I don't know what to do. I don't have money to like, and of course, like I was growing up in like a more rural Pennsylvania, and I was growing up with a family. I was all in medicine. So, no one really knew anything about the music industry or how that really worked or anything like that too. The only thing was, my brother, my older brother, he had gotten an old like Korg analog synth for his Genesis cover band that he was playing in, so of course, whenever that ended and he went to med school, like there was a nice little analog synth sitting there. Of course, I got my hands on that. And I just started tinkering, and yeah, so, I just loved creating sounds, creating music. And that just basically just kind of set me off, like, I think it just, from that point on, it's just a matter of like finding the software, finding, the means to do it. Right. So, it's something I always wanted to do. So I never, the fact that like, hey, I didn't have a studio, or, I don't have money to book a studio or anything like that didn't ever really stop me, and of course, like, I guess my history would say that it wouldn't have anyway. Like I was trying to create taiko drums on a freaking piano, and and creating backing tracks like on a cassette deck. So
I love that, man. The one theme I'm kind of seeing between all three of us is that we kind of all just started tinkering with things until it worked, and then got ourselves into this business. So, and I told you guys, 4 years of college that I spent on didn't prepare me at all for this. So I just kind of like jumped into it, screwed up a lot of stuff in the beginning, and just figured it all out. And so there's something about there is a quality that I think you kind of have to have if you're going to do really well, which is that you can't go, well, I don't have all the answers, so I shouldn't get started. Like if you have that block right now, like if you're worried about getting started in this business because you don't know every moving piece of it, you don't have every single question answered, you don't know exactly how everything's going to work out, you won't start. It's just, that's like a form of procrastination. Nobody has all the answers. I don't have all the answers. Trevor and Mike, we don't have all the answers. So if you guys thought we were the experts that had all answers to all questions in this industry, move on, maybe find another podcast or something like that. That's not what we are. We are professionals. We are competent. We have been doing this for a long time, so we have a lot of knowledge. We have a lot of wisdom, but we are also always in student mode. We're always in learning mode every single day. Right now, during the coronavirus situation, Trevor and Mike and myself were learning about how to operate in this new industry, what's going on. And we were talking to Trevor actually before we started recording that he's saying that his week is probably the busiest he's been all year already, partly due to this kind of situation. So it's been really good. But it's also really challenging. So you have to have a little bit of this kind of like just figure it out mindset. I don't know what it is, what that's called. You usually are not going to be prepared by a formal education process. Like, I'm just going to tell you guys that for real. There's you can learn stuff, you can get trained on stuff, but you're really not going to get the real education, the real knowledge that you really need to know until you just put both feet in and jump into this business. And that means opening up your DAW, producing something today. After you listen to this podcast, go produce something today. Don't put it off. I hope you guys are motivated to do that. And don't get lost. Even in those of you even in Sync Academy, I had one member the other day email me that he was concerned that he just kind of got sucked into this rabbit hole, because it's a lot of stuff, guys, and I'm sorry about that, but it's a good thing to have. It's a good problem, I guess. But he was getting just kind of like, I've just been spending basically a couple of weeks doing nothing but watching tutorials, and I feel like I'm not even moving forward. I'm learning, but like I don't have any new music. So it's like, part of me wants to just like, hello, turn it off, go produce. Like, you've got enough knowledge now, after a couple of weeks of watching these tutorials, you should have something in your head about, man, yeah, I can do this. Let me go give it a shot. So definitely pace yourself with the tutorials if you guys are in Sync Academy, and certainly please do not get into like Netflix binge watching mode where you're just spending all day long watching tutorials. If there's something you need to learn, go watch it, learn it, and then literally turn it off and go put it into practice. Go open up like if you watch, let's say, for example, you want to get better at analyzing reference tracks. Watch our one tutorial. We have a couple, but the one I'm thinking of is where I analyzed a orchestral one. I give you guys all the aspects that I'm listening for, including the emotion. We talk really about that. Watch that. It's about a 1-hour tutorial at most. Watch it, turn it off, then go do that. Go find a reference track, make the same list for yourself, analyze it, create a duplicate or an emulated version of that reference track, and practice what you've just learned. That's really the only thing you should be doing, or the most of what you should be spending most of your time doing, is actually putting your fingers on your keyboard and your eyeballs in front of your DAW. So I want to make sure that you guys are all very clear on that. I don't want to be responsible for people procrastinating starting in this business because now they have all the tutorials, so they don't have to do anything. And it's a big problem. And I know I have a lot of friends that they're about to start that next business, but they got to buy that book first. They got to go to the seminar first. They got to get this online course first. And it's like, no. If you're ready to start, just go start, okay? Like, sometimes that's a form of procrastination, saying, well, if I just had this other book or this other thing, then I'll have all my answers, and then I can actually feel more confident. You're not. You might feel more confident, but guess what? The minute you start, that's when the next questions will start. And whatever plan you think you have in front of you, the whole key to success is improvising. Like, a business plan basically goes out the window the minute you open business, okay? So have your plan, have your idea of what you want to do, but the minute you jump into any industry, stuff's going to change, okay? Everything you thought was going to work out, it's not going to work out. There's going to be some new variable or some new approach or something like that. So just be prepared for that, and just know that you're not alone, and it's not unique to you, that you feel like, whoa, okay, how do I adjust to this? That's what we all have to go through in any business, anything on earth, especially right now with the coronavirus thing. So I want to just thank you guys both for that. I really appreciate getting that backstory. It's really interesting to know, where you guys came from, what got you into this business. And I hope those of you that are watching or listening to this podcast, you guys also now see a little bit more about us, like what got us into this business, what got us into music to begin with, and maybe hopefully giving you a little more encouragement if you feel like you share our mindset, you share this sort of like, hey, I'm just going to figure this out and get into it. If you're feeling that, then you're in the right place, you're in the right industry. And yeah, right now for sure with the coronavirus thing, you're going to see a little bit of a scattering happening. The people that were like halfway serious about this business, who thought it was going to be easy and they could just do it real quickly, maybe they'll be running for the hills right now because they realize, no, this is not something that's going to be extremely easy to get into. But I hope those of you that are convinced that this is a good fit for you, that you feel even more dedicated and more encouraged to keep going with it. Or on the flip side of that, if you feel like, nah, I'm not really feeling this, as I said in a couple of episodes ago, just stop now. Like, just don't continue on with this. I certainly don't want to mislead anybody into this industry if it's not a good fit for you. And I don't want to get an email from you in a year saying, Jesse, you wasted a year of my life. I thought this was going to be great. You said it was going to be a good fit for me, but it's not. I'm trying to put out as much transparent information as I possibly can to try to let you guys know who this is really not for. And it's certainly not a good fit for a lot of producers. So I hope through all these episodes and YouTube videos, you guys are getting a very clear sense of whether or not you should be dedicating your life to this side of this business. So stay healthy, stay safe, guys. I wish you all the best during this coronavirus thing. Some people have asking me, like, how long do I think this is all going to last? I actually think we're closer to the end of it than people realize. I think, I've heard these projections. People are like, oh, this is going to be going on for 6 or 9 months. I don't think so. I think there's a very, very low chance this is going to be going on for months and months and months into the future. How long? Nobody really knows. But my best prediction right now at this point would be that in a couple of weeks, we're going to start to see a little easing up on the restrictions and the quarantining. Not a complete, like, all right, everybody go back to work, but you'll probably see certain people that are lower risk that we can handle going back into society and going back to work, in restaurants and like essential services. You're going to see some sort of easing up on those kind of segments of the population and maybe even parts of the country in a couple of weeks. And then you're going to see it sort of easing up as time goes on, because I don't see this. I've been basically following essentially what's happening with the government and the news and that kind of thing, just not obsessing over, but just want to know the best insights I can possibly get. And from what I'm getting, the people that are going to be making these decisions are hinting at us that things are kind of becoming a little bit more stabilized. The resources are getting to where they need to go. There are some promising potential therapies and cures and things like that are starting to be unrolled or tested, at least right now. And if they prove well with these tests that are coming out, that things are going to be stabilizing fairly quickly. So again, I am not seeing this as the Great Depression 2.0, and I don't even know if I'm seeing this as a recession at this point. It's going to be this weird sort of bookmark in history where it's like, yeah, remember that time when the economy just paused for a month? Like, I think that's what this is going to be. The markets seem to be fairly stabilizing now and trying to boost back up a little bit. So I'm seeing some good signs that this is exactly what I thought it was going to be, which is just going to be a strange, weird medical event in our economy, but it's not a sign of an underlying economic problem or a collapse or anything like that. The businesses are still there, so it's not like we got bombed and people have to go rebuild their office buildings. Like, as soon as this is over or partially over, people are just going to walk right back into their offices and get back to work. So, and I know the stimulus bill is in the final process of getting approved, so there's definitely going to be some relief for a lot of people. So I see a lot of positive things happening right now, and so I hope you guys are all encouraged. And it just, I don't know, for me, maybe you guys we can end on this. Like, I've just felt in the last 4 or 5 days this kind of like cooling off of the temperature. Like, it feels like people have kind of chilled out a lot. I'm not seeing big lines at the grocery stores locally where I am. I don't know about where you guys are at. Maybe it's just also people are now used to what it is. It just, the adjustment period freaks people out. But I definitely feel the sense of this kind of calm down happening in the world. I don't know. What are you guys seeing on your end, Trevor?
I wouldn't say the world. I think America has acted in a way that I was pretty surprised. I think a lot of people did the self-quarantine, and we didn't have to have, the government come in and like force you into your house kind of stuff, which was pleasantly surprising. I don't know what that means. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know I know that certain viruses like this a lot of times have aftershocks where they can get worse in, like, down the road, like a new version comes and stuff. There's all that's a possibility, but I don't really know. But I do know from some of my clients and people in other countries that they're not looking as optimistic as we are. And that's because they live different lives. They have different everything, different landscape, different culture, different all of it. And so some of those countries are a little more like, they feel doom and gloom, or they look doom and gloom. And here we're a lot more spread out. Some states look a little more scary. I know New York is like, they're really looking to do big measures because they look more like Italy or more like India, where it's like everybody's on top of each other. So I think depending on where you are, it changes kind of how you feel. But I don't know, like I kind of have a, like, we'll see. I'm always worried about the worst, kind of, that's just me in general. I'm kind of preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. And the fact that I will say, though, for everybody to feel a little bit better, is I feel a little bit like Jesse, though. I definitely feel a little bit better than I did a week ago, just based off of other people's attitudes. And then also some of the, like, clinical trials of some of these drugs and stuff like that seem a little more positive. So I do feel a little bit better, but I also understand that there's like a whole world of, and this virus thing that we don't know an insane amount about just yet. So it's still very gray, but a little bit less gray, I guess, for me.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I try not to put too much thought into like what's coming or anything like that, because I don't really know enough about, I'm not, I come from a family of doctors, but I myself am the furthest thing from a doctor. So, for me, I just kind of approach this like, if, this seems like a serious thing that I'll take seriously. I think that things are calming down mostly because I think people are starting to get used to how to operate in this. I'm already starting to see it like clients are coming back in the sense of asking for tracks and asking for pitches and stuff like that again. Some of the custom jobs haven't been coming back as much, but I think a lot of that has to do with they're still trying to figure out because no one can shoot anything right now. But overall, as far as anything else goes, people, to be honest, it's been kind of amazing to me, like how many, especially like California and New York and a lot of like the major cities, like how many people have really embraced like staying in and, and kind of figured out how to do this, so I kind of like how, after a month or not a month, after a week, like, it does seem like things are getting stabilized a little bit because, people have started to figure this out. So, but, we'll see what the next week, I've always said that it's like, it hasn't really affected me too much. Just other than like, certain little changes I have to schedule, like when I get my groceries and stuff like that. So, but like, for the most part, I'm still here in my house, like cranking out music, everything's been virtual anyway. So for me, it hasn't really affected me too much, but yeah, I'm kind of like Trevor in the sense of like, well, wait and see, but I'll take things seriously and so.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's great advice. Yeah, we definitely should take it seriously because we're not out of it yet, and we'll kind of see. I think week by week, we'll learn a lot more. I think we can definitely all agree that we've learned a lot more now than we knew 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, obviously. So it seems like with every passing day, new information, new data, and it's, for me, the signs that I'm seeing is that like the more information we're learning, the better it's starting to, the better the situation's starting to see, the more manageable it is, I should say. Still, people are dying. It's still very uncomfortable. A lot of people are missing their paychecks. I'm not trying to minimize any of that kind of stuff. I know that a lot of people are hurting right now, but at least the data that I'm seeing, that I'm paying attention to, is showing that at least the ability for us to be able to treat people, because that's really the big thing. It took me like probably like a full week to even understand what is the big emergency, because if this, like, you guys have heard like, well, it's just the flu, and of course, the elderly and people with health problems are going to die from it, so what's the big deal? Well, the deal is that there are already hospitals that are at their max capacity and they can't handle anymore. So if you have this new novel flu, coronavirus, this new thing that's going around, and even if it is only 1%, deadly, there has a lot of people suddenly needing immediate urgent care. And so the big risk is that you overload our medical system and hospitals and doctors, and there's not enough resources for people that really need it very quickly. So that's why this urgency came into the world, to say, let's do what we can to quarantine, slow this down, slow the spread. It's certainly going to get around. I don't think anybody's saying it's not going to get around, but at least if it does get around to people that are, elderly or have underlying health issues, at least they can get the care that they need. They can get a respirator, they can get a bed, they can be, sort of treated in the way that they need to be treated to best deal with it and hopefully beat it, right? So that's the real, finally I realized that just like maybe a week ago. I was like, oh, okay, that's what all of this panic is. Because again, in the beginning, I was one of the types that was like, really? Okay, this is the next thing we got to be freaked out about, because every 3 or 4 years there's always this new, oh my gosh, this next huge plague that's going to kill us all, and it's always all over the news. And I'm very distrusting of the news, because the news obviously is not there to inform me. It's there to scare me and to get my fight or flight system engaged so that I watch them. So I'm not really looking at the news to help me out in many ways. But this was one of those ones where there was a couple of early reports of it, and I was like, yeah, whatever, I'm not even worried about that. And then it just kept coming, and it wasn't literally until the state of emergency was declared nationally, that I was like, oh, this is like a real thing, and then blocking travel from Europe and all that kind of stuff. I was like, oh, okay, this isn't just news and trying to get people to click on links and videos and stuff. This is actually something that's happening in the world. So I was certainly very late to the game, and so now I'll learn that lesson moving forward. I don't want to obsess over, oh my gosh, there's one little disease over in this part of the corner of the globe and it might spread to all of us. I certainly don't want to be obsessing over that and spending any more time on that, but I'll definitely, my ears will be perked up in the future moving forward, to be aware of this stuff. It's certainly a learning moment for me. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it, and I hope all of you that were watching or listening learned something from this episode. Thank you for listening to the Sync My Music podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want me to do more episodes, all that I ask is that you leave me a review on whatever platform or app that you're listening to. It just takes a few seconds. I'll never charge for this podcast, and I want to keep it 100% ad-free. And your review right now will help me do just that. Thank you so much.